Welcome to my kitchen. I'm in my kitchen today because I want to share with you what I have learned about sources of aluminum in the things that we eat and drink. Speaking of drinking, the first place I want to start is our tap water. That if your drinking water comes from surface water, reservoirs, lakes, streams, rivers, that most likely they will be treating it with an aluminum salt, usually called alum. If your drinking water is treated with aluminum, you want to remove the aluminum. Fortunately, you can filter your water. I have a Brita filter here, and my husband has tested the Brita filter, and the standard filter removes 98.5% of the aluminum. If you choose to use a long last, it will remove aluminum, but a lot less. It will only remove 90%. The other way that aluminum gets added to our drinking water is that as cement pipes corrode, they add aluminum to our drinking water. That aluminum is part of the ingredients in cement. Now, while I'm speaking about filters, one thing is that fluoride filters can be another major source of aluminum. That fluoride filters use aluminum oxide to remove the fluoride. That in the pH of the gut, when you consume that water, in the pH of the gut, the aluminum will be released. So you've got some major sources here, your tap water, and if you're using a fluoride filter that contains aluminum oxide, you want to stop using it because it will add aluminum. And aluminum in drinking water will increase your risk of Alzheimer's. And as the amount of aluminum in your drinking water increases, it also increases your risk of Alzheimer's. Now, other sources. The next source I would like to go to is pots and pans. That you really want to be cooking in stainless steel, ceramic, copper, cast iron, glass. You do not want to be cooking in aluminum. Because once again, when you cook with, for example, a liquid or some type of acid will release more aluminum. Aluminum will be added to your food. As you know, my mother-in-law had late onset Alzheimer's. And one of her major sources of aluminum was that she made homemade tomato juice from fresh tomatoes from her garden. But she cooked it in an aluminum pot. She made a toxic mix that she and my father-in-law drank every morning. The daily sources are ones that you really want to be concerned about, which tap water and the cooking in the aluminum pots and pans are daily sources. Now, let's say you discover that the majority of your pans are aluminum. Go slowly. It does cost money to replace your pans. Figure out which ones you're using most frequently and begin to replace those. Slowly but surely, you'll be able to replace all of your aluminum and begin to have safe cookware. Now, another source of aluminum for my mother-in-law that was daily was her drip style coffee maker. My husband and I were astounded when we learned that most drip style coffee makers use a heating element made of aluminum, and that the water, when your coffee's being made, goes right by or right through that heating element, and it adds aluminum to your coffee, something that you don't want to do. There are aluminum-free drip-style coffee makers as well as other ways to make your coffee. So there are a few out there, and so that you can make your coffee a little safer. Now, another major source is my mother-in-law grew up in the generation where you drank coffee and had a donut every morning. Well, guess what? The donuts that she was eating also contained aluminum. Baking powder. Now, I do not have a container of baking powder in my house, even though there are aluminum-free baking powders. I've decided that I will make my own, and let me show you how I do that. Oh, and I also want to add too that baking powder is a major source of aluminum in terms of how much aluminum is in like a teaspoon of baking powder. And that people who consume a diet of waffles, pancakes, biscuits, that they will increase their rate of Alzheimer's 7.6-fold. That this is something that baking powder is something that you really want to avoid. But you can make your own, which you can do by having 2 parts of baking soda, 1 part of cream of tartar, and then you can add 1 part of cornstarch so it doesn't clump. And I like to store it in a airtight container, which is really neat. And it does, even though when I add the cornstarch, it will sometimes clump. And so I'll just use a little sifter to declump it when I am baking, because I love my muffins, I love my baked breads, and so I like to make my own baking powder. Now, sources of baking powder. You know, if you're not a cook and have control over it, you're going to have to go buy your muffins, buy your pancake mixes, and those are ones, you know, like a pancake mix, muffins, donuts. Those are ones that you might recognize that there's baking powder in it. I have learned a couple things. One is that biscotti and corn muffins have a lot of baking powder in them. So those are ones that you really want to make sure that that the baking powder they're using is aluminum free. There's also some other ones. Fried chicken. I had absolutely no idea that they put baking powder in fried chicken. The other thing that I did not realize is, you know those flat tortillas that you buy? They're flat. Baking powder is a leavening agent. It makes things rise. Tortillas have baking powder in it. So make sure you check your labels carefully. And I will, at the end of the video, give you a list of words to look for when you go to the store to buy these things. All right, next source. Aluminum foil and aluminum cans. I do not have any aluminum cans in the house, so I can't show you that, but I do have aluminum foil because they do make a non-stick aluminum foil, that there's a coating on it that will make sure that the aluminum doesn't get released into the food. You especially do not want to cook with this with any food that is acid. So for example, when I make my lasagna or eggplant parmesan, and that the aluminum foil, you know, I use it as a cover, I make sure that it doesn't come in contact with the tomato sauce, even though that there is a coating, because I know how serious aluminum, what kind of damage aluminum can do to your brain. But at least we've got a fairly safer alternative. Oh, and I didn't get my parchment paper out. That you can use parchment paper. For example, you can wrap your baked potatoes and cook them in parchment paper. All right, let me move on to some other sources. This was a source for my husband, not a daily source, but a source. Pickles. They can contain alum. That you can find pickles that do not have alum. This is one brand. Relish will also contain alum. And yes, my mother-in-law made incredible bread and butter pickles, but the ingredient was alum that she used. Many pickle recipes do contain alum, so you want to look at that and avoid it. Now, another source in the kitchen would be food dyes. That there's a lot of foods that are colored, and that one of the things that you want to look for is what's called aluminum lake. Sometimes they will just use lake, and I will avoid anything that says lake or aluminum lake. There are safer alternatives. Here is a company that makes food dyes that are from natural sources. And those are going to be much safer. The colors aren't as brilliant, but my husband did have the challenge of making a birthday cake or have a baker make a birthday cake for his mother for her 90th birthday. And the baker used these food dyes as well as aluminum-free baking powder. And there's actually a write-up about that on Dennis's blogger. Now, a couple of other sources. One that surprised me is soy. And I know there's going to be some of you who are not going to be happy with learning this, that the soy plant is actually what is called an aluminum accumulator. It accumulates the aluminum. So when you ingest soy, you're going to be ingesting the aluminum. And I know that the food industry has talked about how soy is a really wonderful protein that's much better for your heart rather than eating beef. But you do need to be careful because it does contain aluminum. The other hidden source in the kitchen is cheese. That soft cheese there's a process that they use to soften the cheese that uses SALP, sodium aluminum phosphate. Now you will not see that on the ingredient because it is not an ingredient, it is just used in the process. So that is a very challenging one, and I am a lover of cream cheese, and I have learned to live with other alternatives and have cream cheese only once in a while. Let me check to make sure I've covered everything, but while I'm doing that, what I will show you is a list of words that you want to look for when you go to the store to do your shopping. Alum, which can be in your tap water or in pickles. Alumina, aluminum, bauxite, and aluminum lake as a colorant. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention with food dyes, there is a food dye called carmine, which actually comes from an insect. However, though, that the carmine is obtained from the aluminum complex derived from carminic acid from the insect. So that little insect actually has a toxin in it, aluminum. So it may be from a natural source, but it will contain aluminum. And wow, that's great. I finished things. My next video is going to be going to my medicine cabinet and also to my cosmetic cabinet and looking at sources of aluminum there. Thanks for listening. See you next time.